What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'm back with my series on my NHL 2021-2022 season predictions. For today's video, we're talking about a team that massively disappointed and completely declined and fell off a cliff, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Entering last season, Columbus was coming off a relatively solid year, a year where they absolutely surprised everybody and blew everyone's expectations out of the water. A team that lost a lot of key free agents in the offseason and no one expected them to make the playoffs. However, they did make the playoffs. They beat out the Leafs in the qualifying round, but ultimately lost the Tampa Bay Lightning, who ended up winning their first of 2 Stanley Cups in that opening round in the 2020 bubble. So for last year, although I don't think a lot of people expect them to be an elite team to really compete for a Stanley Cup, I do think some people still thought that they'd be relatively solid and be a competitive team in that Central Division, including myself. I had them making the playoffs, and boy, was I wrong. So taking a look at what they did last season, they had a miserable year, an 18-26-12 record for a total of 48 points, which was dead last in the Central Division, only on a 70-point pace. Taking a look at their offensive numbers, at 2.39 goals for per game, which was pretty bad at 29th in the league, and a 15.4 power play percentage, 27th in the NHL. Obviously, these are very atrocious offensive stats, but as we know at Columbus, they're not a very good offensive team. It's been like that ever since, the inauguration of this franchise. Looking at the defensive stats, that's where they really took a step back. A 3.29 goals against per game, which was 25th in the league, and a 79% penalty kill percentage, which was tied for 20th. So like I mentioned, we knew that offense was probably going to be a key issue for this team, but defensively and in goal, they took a massive step back, and these stats basically just bottom feeder stats. Just a very awful year all around for Columbus. Taking a look at their top 5 scores from last season, the leading scorer being Oliver Bjorkstrand had an amazing year, 56 games, 18 goals, 26 assists for 44 points. Now, I always knew that Bjorkstrand was a relatively, decent winger, but this past season, he took his game to another level, and obviously, he was basically the only bright spot on this Blue Jackets squad. Then we have a two-way tie for second, first being Cam Atkinson, who had 15 goals and 19 assists for 34 points. Now, Atkinson a few years back had some pretty amazing goal-scoring years. He had one season where I believe he scored well over 30 goals. Another year, he had a career high in like 41 goals, if I'm not mistaken. So, over the past couple of years, his offense kind of took a little bit of a dip, but that was expected, especially on a team that doesn't have a ton of offense around him. And also we have Jack Roslavick, who was acquired from Winnipeg at the early going of the season, had an amazing breakout year, 48 games, 12 goals, 22 assists for 34 points. Now, obviously that Winnipeg and Columbus trade was headlined by Pierre-Luc Dubois, traded for Patrick Lainey, and Jack Roslavick, let's be honest, was kind of seen as just a little bit of a throw in there. However, he was the better piece of those two coming the other way, and he really stepped up his game, was a very surprising piece, and potentially the top line center entering next season. Maybe that's not ideal, but nonetheless, great season for him. Then in fourth, we have Seth Jones, who had 5 goals and 23 assists for 28 points in a full 56 games. Now, Jones was just very bad all around. Defensively, he just took a massive step back. And even on offense, although 28 points is not terrible, especially for a defenseman, I still feel like he has a ton more to give offensively. So definitely he's looking for a bounce back season with now being traded to the Blackhawks. And then we also have a two-way tie for fifth. First, Patrick Lainey, who in 46 games had 12 goals and 12 assists for 24 points. That would be combining the one game he played in Winnipeg. So for Lainey, we all know he has the elite offensive goal scoring upside in him. He showed it in the early going of his career in Winnipeg. Those last couple years, you could say wasn't quite what they had expected. Things, I guess, weren't working out. They flipped him to Columbus, and this past season was very miserable for him, to say the least. Now, part of it was probably, him headbutting with the coaching staff, especially John Tortorella, who they decided to fire. So I would expect him to have a much better bounce back season because he just was not being utilized well. A lot of people were saying that, he should be more defensive. He should be more a power forward. That does not fit to the skill set of Patrick Lainey and what he brings. He brings offense. He brings goal scoring. He is an elite sniper. You use him in the right way, he will provide his offense. But if you use him in that role, it's just not going to work out. And we also have Max Domey, who in 54 games had 9 goals and 15 assists for 24 points. Now for Domey, I still feel like he's a relatively solid player. Could be a pretty decent second line center. We saw what he did in Montreal. He had like a career year, 72 points his first year there. His second year, he took a bit of a step back, but at the same time, it was still relatively solid production. And I was expecting much of the same in Columbus, but so far hasn't quite worked out. His one year that he's been there, A little bit disappointing. So hopefully next year he has a bit of a bounce back season. Then in goal, they had their tandem here. Elvis Merzlikins was the better of the two goalies. 28 games, 8-12-5 record, a 2.77 goals against average, and a 916 save percentage. Now, obviously, Columbus was a total flop all around. However, Elvis, I mean, he did his best. You know, he kept them in games. His goals against was under 3 on an atrocious team. Save percentage above 915. You can't say that Elvis was not good, but obviously it didn't translate to wins because the team around him just didn't provide any offense. However, Jonas Korpisalo, he struggled a lot more. 33 games, a 9-13-7 record, a 3.3 goals against average, and an 894 save percentage. Yikes. Yeah, same can't be said about Korpisalo. I mean, obviously Columbus struggled all around. They couldn't get offense. Plus, with him in goal, he just didn't give them the saves. So obviously this team had a miserable year. And in terms of what they did entering this season, it appears that they're probably moving in a different direction now. So entering this season, Columbus, I don't think has really any expectations, especially now moving in a very tough Metropolitan division. And considering what they did, which we'll get into right now, it just looks like a team that's probably starting to retool, maybe rebuild, and they're not looking to compete for a playoff spot this year. Now, they didn't make a ton of trades and signings this offseason, but in terms of what they did do, pretty significant. Obviously, key loss being Seth Jones, who, despite the rough year, still one of their better defensemen. They decided to trade him to Chicago. Obviously, they couldn't work out an extension, and he probably didn't want to return to Columbus, so they decided to flip him to Chicago, get the assets back, and he signed a massive contract in Chicago. In my opinion, they totally overpaid him, but that's beside the point. Anyway, yeah, so obviously, they're moving in a different direction now. They got a lot younger by acquiring Adam Buckfist, who is a very solid offensive defenseman prospect from the Chicago Blackhawks. I feel like they did pretty good in that trade, to be honest. They also lost Cam Atkinson, who they ended up trading to Philadelphia. You know, a guy who's, you know, a little bit of a veteran, but I feel like he can fit in a system with the Flyers. But in terms of what they got in return, Jacob Voracek, probably the Flyers didn't see him as a part of their, you know, short-term future or long-term future, I guess. He's a guy who's getting a lot older, probably potentially past his prime, and now he's going to a Blue Jacket system that's kind of just sort of there, kind of maybe rebuilding a bit. I don't know exactly where he fits, but I still feel like he still has some offense left in the tank. And one more addition, I said Jake Bean question mark because obviously his development didn't quite go as planned with the Hurricanes, and maybe the Columbus sees something in him that maybe he can, you know, crack a top 6 role on that blue line. Maybe he can finally develop into a full-time NHLer. Is he ready to break out into that role? That it remains to be seen. That's why I have him as a question mark, because I don't know if he's going to make a significant impact automatically in the NHL for this Blue Jackets team. So yeah, in terms of what they did, I would say they downgraded. It kind of appears they're heading into a rebuild. I mean, they got a lot younger and they're stockpiling some draft picks. So I definitely think they're trying to, you know, establish a core again and build for the future. These are my top 5 scorers for the Columbus Blue Jackets this season. And first, I have Patrik Laine scoring 35 goals and 26 assists for 61 points. I mean, we all know he has it in him. He's supposed to be an elite goal scorer, and I think he's going to bounce back because, you know, John Tortorella is no longer there. And, you know, he really struggled under Tortorella's defensive system. So I feel like now that he's gone, he should return to his A game, and I would expect at the very least a 30-goal season. Now, on this Blue Jackets team, there's not a ton of offense, but I feel like him, you know, being the lethal goal scorer he is, he will get his. If he's put in the right position, he should score 30, 35 goals. So I've been scoring about 35 goals and roughly 60 points. I feel like he's still a relatively solid playmaker all around. So he gets, you know, 25-ish assists. That should be about 60 points. So yeah, I think that's fair for him. Hopefully he bounces back and has a very solid year. In second, I'm going to go with Oliver Bjorkstrand, scoring 26 goals and 31 assists for 57 points. Based on what he did last season, I expect his production to be much of the same. He's just a very solid, underrated top 6 winger. The lone consistent jacket last season, he's definitely a valuable asset. I know he's like 26, 27. Maybe he doesn't fit the timeline for this Blue Jackets team. I don't know. Maybe they would look to trade him, but he is locked up on a relatively reasonable contract. So maybe they'd rather keep him around, but I just feel like if they're looking to rebuild and maybe, you know, tank a little bit, that could be a guy that they can move. But at the same time, maybe he does fit the system. I guess I'd love to know what you guys think about him. Is he a tradable asset? And a third, I'm going to go with Jacob Voracek, scoring 13 goals and 36 assists for 49 points. Like I said, for Voracek, he's an older veteran in this league. He's actually returning to Columbus. This is, I believe, where he started his career. You know, he's probably declining, I would say, but I still feel like he has offense left in the tank. He should set up a ton of guys. He's going to lead the team in assists, in my opinion. I just feel like he's still a really solid playmaker. So if he gets, roughly 45, 50 points, push for about 15 goals, I think that's relatively solid, what we would expect for Voracek this upcoming year. And I went with a two-way tie for fourth. First, I went with Jack Roslavick, building off the very solid first year he had in Columbus, 17 goals, 30 assists for 47 points. Obviously, Roslavick was a very surprising breakout player ever since he was traded from Columbus. And although I don't know what to expect from him, I still feel like he's a very proven top 6 option at this point, based on what he did last season. If he can continue, the upward trajectory he was on, I could assume he probably scored roughly 45 plus points, in a great center role. If he's playing with Lainey, for example, a guy he can feed the puck to, who can snipe goals, I feel like he should produce a ton of points, maybe a little bit more. Maybe I'm underrating him in this situation, but I feel like as of right now, it's relatively fair based on, what we have or have not seen yet. I mean, he had one great season. Let's see if he can do that again. And I also have Zach Rorenski scoring 47 points with 15 goals and 32 assists. Now, Rorenski was a guy that they were able to lock up long term. He is, the core of that blue line moving forward. He's their number 1 defenseman officially. I think he's very solid all around. He's going to be playing a ton of minutes. And, he still has that offense in him. He's going to score, roughly 40 plus points in my opinion. And he's just a great guy to build around for this organization moving forward. All right, so now it's time for me to give you guys my predictions on where I feel the Columbus Blue Jackets stand for this upcoming season. Based on what they did in the offseason, I'm kind of being told right now that they're probably moving into a rebuild and they're not going to be as competitive as they probably were in years past, especially considering the tough division that they're in. And the Metropolitan Division is completely stacked. And the rest of those teams in that division are looking to compete for a playoff spot. Columbus is one of those teams that I just don't feel like are quite on that same level, especially based on how they downgraded. And I feel like a lot of people are easily penciling this team in as the worst team in this division. However, I don't think they're as bad as people think. Like, to be honest, I still see a lot of very solid pieces on this team up front. I do like a lot of the pieces they have. On defense, although it's probably taken a step back, I still feel like there's a lot of potential there. And in goal, I feel like Elvis Merzlikins, Jonas Korpisalo, still not a bad goaltending tandem, to be honest with you. Although I'm not going to pick them to make the playoffs, I still feel like there is some opportunities for them to be a relatively competitive team. With that, I do have them finishing last in the Metropolitan Division, but with a 30-39-13 record for a total of 73 points, but obviously not making the playoffs. Yeah, I still don't think they're going to have a great season. Obviously, 73 points, that's not a great team. But like I said, I still feel like there's a lot of very solid pieces on this team, especially the goaltending. It can hold up pretty well. They can shut the door and probably, keep them in a lot of games. That's why I have them losing a lot of overtimes. I think a lot of people, they just blow the offseason moves out of proportion. Like, yeah, they lost significant pieces, but a lot of people just assume that all of a sudden, oh yeah, they're going to go in ultra tank mode. They're going to have like a 50-point season. I just don't think they're that bad, to be totally honest. Now, being the worst team in the division, obviously, it's not saying a ton for me saying that they're not that bad. But I will say, if it's any consolation, like for San Jose being the worst in the Pacific, in my opinion, the Central, there's the Coyotes, and the Atlantic is the Sabres. I feel like the Columbus is the best of those 4 teams. They're the best last place team. So yeah, regardless, they are in a very tough division. So that's why they're probably, not going to be really competing for a playoff spot. And likely they do finish last in the division. However, I just don't feel like they're going to be like atrocious, god-awful as some may peg them out to be. But anyway, that's going to wrap up my season preview on the Columbus Blue Jackets. Do you agree with me? Do you think they're probably going to finish last in the Metro? Do you think I'm overrating this team and you guys think that somehow they finish much worse in the standings? Or do you actually think I'm underrating this team and you agree that maybe there's some very solid pieces there and they can actually still legitimately compete for a playoff spot, maybe even get into a playoff spot? Let me know what you guys think in the comments if you want to. Please leave a like on this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you guys for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video. See you guys later.